I'd like to kick off this talk about self-neglect by introducing you to some of the people who I learned about in the course of this research. First, let's call him Bruce. Bruce filled his upper floor flat with tons of timber, scrap metal, old furniture, and he neglected his other needs because of his determination that nothing should go to waste. So no maintenance was done for years. Bruce literally moved through tunnels amidst the stuff and lived in mortal terror of being found out by the housing association. He would freeze if a brown envelope dropped through the letterbox in case it was from the housing association. And when, after years of living like this, he could no longer hide the situation and thought he was about to be made homeless, he said it was almost a relief. Even if he was to be on the street, he wouldn't have to be afraid anymore. Let's call him Kevin. Living conditions in Kevin's home had deteriorated enormously. Social services and environmental health had tried to engage him with making changes, but he didn't want to let others in or change anything about the way he lived. Eventually, they had to intervene and imposed a clean-up. Kevin felt so violated when this started that he attacked the social worker with a hammer. And let's call him Michael. Michael was becoming dishevelled, increasingly smelly. He went to the pub twice a week, but rarely went out elsewhere. He wasn't aggressive, but he was disruptive, and eventually ran the risk of being barred from the pub, as he had been from many other pubs in the neighbourhood. He was getting thinner, and increasingly his health appeared to be suffering. He rejected any input from social care outright. So self-neglect happens when we don't, for whatever reason, take care of our own health, personal care, hygiene, or home surroundings. Probably all of us do it from time to time. However, when it reaches a point where it might be getting out of control and puts a person at risk of serious harm, it can become an issue for social care, health services, housing support, the many other support organisations in people's lives, and for neighbours, family, and others among the public. It might seem easy to say, something must be done, and rush in and just do it, whether that's cleaning, removing the person from the situation, eviction. Other times we say, well, they're making their own choices. We can't interfere, even if they seem to be bad choices. I would argue that very often neither one is the solution. Instead, we need to get beside the person, understand where self-neglect comes from, and then find a path between these two poles of intervention on the one hand and non-interference on the other. So this is the dilemma of self-neglect. When do we intervene? When do we not? People do have human rights to respect for their private lives, but we might also expect life and health to be protected. The neighbours, the person on the street might ask for someone to step in, and often maybe this should happen. But quick solutions and magic bullets tend not to work well, as I will go on to explain. What does work? Understanding, inquiring curiosity, and persistence. Now, there's been a strong move in safeguarding policy and practice over the last 15 years or so towards respecting individuals' autonomy. People have always felt this is important. An Englishman's home is his castle, they say. People have a right to make unwise decisions, and for very good reasons. Stepping in and telling someone that they can no longer live their life as they would choose for themselves is a big step, and rightly a last resort. But there have been nearly 300 safeguarding reviews of deaths from self-neglect in the last 12 years, which shows that the emphasis put on autonomy has sometimes left people at risk. The term lifestyle choice is often used to indicate that the person has freely chosen their situation, and professionals therefore have no right to get involved. However, when we look at the terror of discovery Bruce was living with, or Michael's growing isolation and loss of the pubs he enjoyed, what does it mean to respect people's choice in these circumstances? There is no single story of self-neglect, and this is why quick solutions, dismissing deep-rooted problems as lifestyle choice or leaping to intervene too readily, often don't work well. Take Bruce. While he couldn't bear to part with any of what he had stored, he didn't want to carry on the way he was either. Efforts to clear the flat had to go slowly, carefully, sensitively, and at his pace. But what really made the difference was that the social worker engaged with Bruce about his hopes and values. His pride in his DIY skills, his desire to make something useful out of what otherwise would have been waste, his shame at what it had led to. It meant that when his flat was cleared, and in Bruce's own words, 20 tons of stuff leaves a big hole behind it when it goes. That hole could be filled by connecting him with carpentry classes where others could learn from him. Taking the time to understand what mattered to Bruce helped to restore his self-worth. Michael didn't want to know about social work or any other support services, so his social worker changed tack and got to know the people in Michael's community. He found that the pub owners were actually concerned for Michael. They wanted to help rather than to exclude him. But their customers were leaving because of him, and they'd found that Michael himself absolutely hated the idea of receiving what he saw as charity. In the end, the social worker was able to broker a solution where Michael paid the pub owners to do his laundry and for a cooked meal once a week, and he integrated better into the pub. Recognising and affirming Michael's need to feel independent unblocked the problem and brought him back into the community. What we see in Bruce's and Michael's stories is a shift from solving the problem to showing concerned curiosity for them, not seeing their lives as a problem to be fixed, but coming from a place of genuine concern and interest and wanting to know what matters to them. It was recognising the strengths they had, Bruce's concern to make good use of the materials he found and share his skills, Michael's pride in his independence, and working with those rather than framing their situations simply as a problem. So when we read about cases of self-neglect, often we ask, how can this be allowed to happen? Or when we come across them in real life, much of the time we might put it down to the person's own choice. Often, however, there's a complicated story behind the way the person is living, and only by understanding it and understanding the complex emotions contributing to the self-neglect can we find a satisfactory resolution. It's easy to call for social workers, the GP, environmental health, somebody to step in and put a stop to a neighbour living like this. Alternatively, it can be easy to assume that the person is making their own decisions, and for practitioners or others to argue that they've already discharged their responsibility and need to respect the person's own choice. It takes time and effort to look beyond the biases and assumptions we bring to these cases and get alongside someone living in extremely difficult conditions. But suspending judgment about living conditions, smells, clutter, appearance, poor self-care and the like until we understand the stories and the values behind them is something we can all do. And it often leads to solutions that may not be quick but are more lasting. We can see from the stories I've talked about what can be possible when an approach of compassionate curiosity is taken. We saw how understanding, patience and persistence helped Bruce and Michael find solutions that worked for them rather than being imposed on them. And Kevin? He's still angry about what happened to him, but he understands why and now provides training for the local authority based on his experiences. That he could go from assaulting the social worker to working with social workers to make things better for them and for other people in dealing with situations of self-neglect, I think, is testament to what this approach of engaging with concerned curiosity can really deliver for people in self-neglect.